I received a text at 11:07 p.m., the night before my daughter's wedding. If you knew the truth, you'd cancel tomorrow. No name, no context. Just that one sentence hanging like a noose around my heart. I hadn't been part of her life for years. After her mother died, I shut down. I buried myself in work, in silence, in guilt. Emily grew up with her aunt, while I drifted like a ghost through holidays and birthdays, sending cards instead of showing up. When she invited me to her wedding 6 months ago, I thought it was a miracle, a second chance. I paid for the venue, the dress, the flowers. I even practiced my speech. I was going to walk her down the aisle. It was all coming together. But then came that message. And the next morning, while she was out getting ready, I found myself pacing outside her bedroom. A voice in my head whispered, "Check the closet." It made no sense, but I opened the door anyway. I moved aside her gown, the boxes of shoes, and then I saw it. A shoebox, taped shut and shoved behind old sweaters. I pried it open. Inside were hospital forms, therapy notes, and a photo of a boy with my eyes. That's when I realized the wedding wasn't the story. The real story was buried under 28 years of silence, and what I'd find next would rip open the past and change everything about tomorrow. I hadn't stepped foot in Emily's apartment until this week. She'd invited me to stay nearby, saying the guest bedroom was technically available, but not in a way that felt welcoming. Her tone was always polite, never warm, like I was a distant uncle, not her father. After Barbara, my wife, passed away, I didn't know how to be a parent. She was the emotional anchor. Without her, I became a shell. I drowned myself in military consulting jobs, disappeared into overseas contracts, and when Emily cried for me, I told my sister to take her. Just for a while, I'd said, but a while became years. I missed her first school recital, her first heartbreak, her graduation. I missed her growing up, because watching her meant confronting what I'd lost. So instead, I disappeared into silence. When she called 6 months ago to say, "Dad, I'm getting married. If you want to be involved, this is your chance," I thought it was mercy. I said yes before she finished the sentence. I threw myself into planning. I wired over $32,000 for the venue and catering. I helped pick floral arrangements. I bought her fiancé a custom tux. I rehearsed walking her down the aisle in front of a mirror, hoping she'd forgive me a little more with each step. She was always respectful. She answered my calls, smiled in photos, but there was distance. A wall built brick by brick over 2 decades, and I hadn't earned the tools to tear it down. Then the text arrived. "If you knew the truth, you'd cancel tomorrow." It came from a blocked number. No name. Just that. I stared at it for hours, fingers trembling over the keyboard, unsure if I should ask her. At breakfast, I mustered the courage. Did anything weird happen last night? I got this text." She didn't look up from her coffee. "You finally care now?" "I've always cared," I said. "No," she replied, voice steady, eyes cold. "You've always paid." I didn't say anything after that. The guilt hollowed me out. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Last-minute fittings, final guest list confirmations. By the time she left for her spa appointment, the house was silent. That's when the anxiety crept in. The message clawed at me. What did it mean? Who would try to ruin this moment? A part of me whispered that I had a right to know, that maybe, just maybe, something was wrong. I stood outside her bedroom door. I told myself I'd just peek, not pry. Her closet door was open. The white dress hung beautifully, simple, elegant, delicate as a breath. I reached to touch the lace, and something shifted behind a stack of sweaters. A cardboard shoebox, taped shut. I knew I shouldn't, but I did. Inside were documents, lots of them, neatly stacked, medical reports, therapist letters, scribbled journal entries. The one on top read, Emily Parker, patient history, PTSD, abandonment trauma. I sat down. My knees buckled. The next paper was worse. A letter from a therapist to an adoption counselor dated 5 years ago. She's begun to suspect there's more to her family's history. Requests for genetic testing have increased. Patient reports dreams of a twin brother. Twin brother? My heart raced. At the very bottom, I found it. A yellowed envelope with Barbara's handwriting. To Richard, in case I never get to explain. My hands shook as I unfolded the letter. The ink had faded slightly, but her cursive was unmistakable. I had to choose, Richard. I wanted to tell you, but you weren't ready to hear it. You were broken. We both were. But one of them needed saving, and I made that choice alone. Forgive me. That was it. No explanation, no names. Just that. I sat there in her closet, heart thundering, mind spiraling. One of them? Who was them? What choice? What had Barbara done? And more importantly, what was Emily hiding? I read Barbara's letter a dozen times that night. One of them needed saving, and I made that choice alone. Those words haunted me. I kept circling the same question. Who was them? I didn't remember having twins. There was only Emily. That's what the doctors told me. That's what Barbara said. But the letter, along with the therapy records, the whispered name, Tommy, suggested otherwise. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, eyes red, coffee cold, the folder of documents open in front of me like a crime scene. Finally, I pulled out my laptop and searched for hospital records from the year Emily was born. It wasn't easy. The facility had closed 2 decades ago, but I found archived medical data through a local records office. I filed a request, forged a few veteran credentials to speed things up. By noon, I had it. Birth record: Emily Parker, 6 lbs, 3 As. Twin B, male infant, listed as stillborn due to respiratory failure. His name was handwritten in the margin, Tommy. The floor tilted under me. I gripped the table edge to keep from falling. Barbara had been pregnant with twins, and she never told me. Or maybe she did, and I was too numb in those years to listen, too drunk on grief to process anything that wasn't immediate pain. My mind raced. Why would she lie? Why would she send one child away? And most terrifying of all, what if Tommy hadn't died? What if someone had taken him? I spent the next 2 hours cross-referencing private adoption records. I found nothing. No legal papers, no transfers. But I did find a retired nurse who worked in the maternity ward at that hospital. I called her. I remember Barbara, she said. Kind woman, strong, quiet. But there was a moment. What kind of moment? She hesitated. After the delivery, the boy was taken for observation. There were complications, but, well, I was told not to ask questions. Barbara stayed an extra night, which was unusual. And the baby? They said he passed, but no one let me see the body. I hung up, sick to my stomach. My wife had made a choice I hadn't known about. She'd given one child away, maybe to protect him, maybe because of me. I needed answers. I waited for Emily to return from a wedding rehearsal. She walked through the door in a crisp white blouse, her hair tied back, eyes exhausted. I didn't wait. Emily, we need to talk. She dropped her purse. Now? I read the letter, the one from your mother. Her face didn't change. She just crossed her arms and said, "Took you long enough." I blinked. You knew? I found it when I was 14, hidden in her Bible, along with the therapy letters, and a photo of a baby boy. Why didn't you tell me? She laughed, bitter and sharp. Tell you? You mean the man who sent me away for a little while and vanished for a decade? You weren't around to tell. I didn't know what to do. I was broken. You weren't the only one grieving. I sat down, stunned. She kept standing, voice rising with every word. I started asking questions. I looked for him. I thought maybe if I found him, I'd understand why I always felt incomplete. Why Mom cried when she thought I was asleep. Did you find anything? I asked. She paused. No, not really. Some dead ends, a few leads I couldn't follow. I was too young. And now? Now I'm getting married. That's the only truth that matters. She turned to leave, but I couldn't stop. Emily, do you think he's still out there? She froze. I don't know, she said, softer now. But if he is, he doesn't know he has a sister. Or a father who was too checked out to notice he ever existed. I stood up. I want to make this right. She looked at me with eyes I hadn't earned the right to meet. You can't fix this, Dad. You don't get to walk in 20 years late and play hero. And just like that, she left the room. I stood there in the silence, holding the echo of a name I'd never known. Tommy. 2 days after Emily stormed out, I found myself staring at the business card of a private investigator named Frank Delaney. A friend from my military days recommended him. He finds ghosts, my buddy said. That's exactly what I needed. Frank was in his 50s, calm and methodical. When I gave him the name Tommy Parker and the birth date, he leaned back and whistled low. That's a cold trail, he said, but not impossible. I gave him everything I had. Barbara's letter, hospital notes, the name of the adoption agency I'd found scrawled in one of Emily's old journals. I need to know if he's alive, I told him, and if he ever knew who he was. It took 5 days. On the 6th, Frank showed up on my doorstep with a folder and a look I didn't like. He's alive, he said, handing me the file. I opened it with shaking hands. Tommy Jensen, age 28. Adopted 6 days after birth by Robert and Sandra Jensen. Raised in Vermont. Honors student. Law degree. Works in family law. Engaged. My mouth went dry. Frank was still talking. The adoption was private, sealed tight. But your wife went through a backdoor channel. Cash under the table. No paper trail connecting her to the placement, but she made it happen. Why? Frank looked at me hard. That's not my job to say. But I already knew. A memory, long buried, rose to the surface. Barbara and I sitting in the hospital hallway. She was crying. The doctor saying something about respiratory distress, possible neurological impairment, special care required. And me, God help me, I remember saying, we can't do this, not both. We're not equipped. Barbara didn't speak to me for 2 days after that. And when she did, she said only, I've handled it. I thought she meant burial arrangements. I never asked. I sat down on the porch, folder in my lap, head in my hands. I'd left her to make an impossible decision. And she did. Alone. I thought about Emily, about the way she carried herself. Graceful, determined, but haunted. The therapy notes made sense now. That missing piece in her life, it was real. Flesh and blood, I didn't know how to tell her. I didn't have to. That evening, she came to me. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes red. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in a day. I need to tell you something, she said, voice cracking. I nodded, unsure if I was ready. I'm not getting married. I stood there, stunned. What happened? She handed me a photograph. 2 children, around 6 years old, in a summer camp t-shirt. A girl and a boy, both with wide smiles and unmistakably similar eyes. That's us, she whispered. Me and Tommy. I met him when I was 6. We were in the same camp. We stayed friends. Reconnected in college. We thought it was fate. My knees buckled. I sat. She kept talking. I did a DNA test last week. Just to be sure. Something about the way we connected. It was too deep. Too instant. I didn't want to believe it, but the results came in yesterday. She paused. He's my brother. Half-brother. Same father. You. I felt like the air had been punched from my lungs. Emily. No. She raised a hand. Don't say anything. Just listen. I did. I ended it. Immediately. He doesn't know the full story yet. I told him there was a mistake, that it couldn't happen. I didn't tell him he's your son. Her voice cracked again. I couldn't destroy him like that. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Mine too. How could this happen? She whispered. I didn't have the heart to tell her that once I'd looked a doctor in the eye and said I wasn't ready to raise a disabled child, that I'd essentially signed my son away out of fear. So I lied. I don't know, I said. She collapsed onto the couch beside me, shoulders shaking. For the first time in decades, I put my arm around my daughter, and she didn't pull away. We sat like that for hours. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. We were 2 people, grieving a future we'd never have, mourning a family we never knew existed. And somewhere out there, my son, her brother, was sitting in his own silence, not knowing that everything he thought he knew about love, about identity, about belonging, was about to shatter. Emily stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. The same window Barbara once stood at, rocking a baby in her arms. Time collapsed into itself in that moment. You know which child you gave up, right? She said, not looking at me. I said nothing. Do you even remember? Still, I said nothing. What could I possibly say? She turned, her voice hard. You signed the form, didn't you? I looked at her then, and I saw what I'd spent years avoiding. Pain, accusation, disbelief. I didn't know what I was signing, I said. A lie so thin, I could hear it crack in my throat. Her laugh was hollow. Of course you did. I sat down on the arm of the couch. My knees didn't feel trustworthy. It was one meeting, a blur. I was half sedated, grieving, confused, but conscious, she snapped. Present enough to decide which baby to keep. I didn't decide, I whispered. Yes, you did. You chose me. Her words were a hammer, not because she was wrong, but because I had never once thought of it that way. I had always believed Barbara bore that weight alone, that the decision was hers, that I was simply there, a bystander. But I wasn't. I remembered the cold hospital lights, the doctor's words. There may be cognitive impairments. Barbara crying silently beside me, and me saying nothing, doing nothing. I'd let fear speak for me, and that silence had damned a child. I failed both of you, I said, voice cracking. I left her to make the hardest choice imaginable, and then I left you too. Emily didn't respond. Her silence was louder than any accusation. I need to see him, I finally said. No, she replied. You don't get to walk in and fix this. He deserves better than another stranger with guilt in his pockets. I'm not looking to fix anything. I just want to look him in the eye, once. She hesitated, then pulled something from her purse. A business card. Handwritten. I didn't give him your name. Just this. Tommy Jensen. Esk. Jensen and Rowe Law Group, White River Junction, Vermont. The next morning, I drove 6 hours north in a fog so thick I nearly turned around twice. When I arrived, the law office was in a converted house. White siding, navy shutters, clean, professional. I stepped inside and gave my name. The receptionist narrowed her eyes. You're here to see Mr. Jensen? Yes, no appointment. Just a personal matter? She left. A few minutes later, a man entered the lobby. He looked like me, not in a mirror image kind of way, but something in the jawline, the eyes. It was undeniable and painful. Mr. Parker? He asked. I stood. Yes. I'm Tommy. We shook hands. His grip was firm, professional, not familial. He led me into a small office and closed the door. I know who you are, he said, before I could speak. I opened my mouth, but he raised a hand. I don't want a story. I've read the letter, the reports. I know about the decision, about the hospital. I know everything. I swallowed. I just wanted to say, you don't need to say anything, he cut in. Really, I'm fine. I have 2 parents who love me, who chose me. I understand. No, you don't, he said, voice sharper now. You don't get to understand from the outside. You made a choice. Whether it was silence or fear or selfishness, I don't care. It happened, and I lived a full life without you. I nodded slowly. Do you hate me? He looked down, then up again. No? I don't even know you well enough for that. But I don't need you. I never did. It was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to me, and it shattered me. He stood. If there's nothing else, I rose. My legs barely worked. Just one thing, I said. You deserve the truth. Your mother loved you. That's all I came to say. He didn't respond. I walked out of his office and into the Vermont air, lungs full of regret. 2 children, 2 chances, both gone, and all I had left was the name they'd never shared, Dad. The day after I returned from Vermont, I sat down at my desk and pulled out 2 blank sheets of paper, one for Emily, one for Tommy. No emails, no texts, just ink, paper, and truth. I didn't explain. I didn't defend myself. What defense could I offer that wouldn't reek of cowardice? I wrote what mattered. To Emily, I wrote of my pride, of the weight I carried knowing I'd failed to be her father when it counted most. I told her that her resilience was her own, not a product of me. And I asked her to forgive me, not for the past, but for still hoping to be part of her future. To Tommy, I kept it simple. I acknowledged the decision I'd been complicit in. I admitted my fear, my silence. And at the end, I wrote, I never got to hold you. Not once. But your mother did. And she smiled. I want you to see that. I folded a black and white photo into the letter, an ultrasound printout, soft at the edges. Barbara, glowing, held it in both hands, her eyes on the screen. Her smile was full, unguarded. She was already in love. Then I did something final. I called my attorney and rewrote my will. The house, the savings, the pension, split 50-50, no conditions, no conversations, just legacy. I didn't expect gratitude, only clarity. A week later, I received no reply from Tommy. No calls, no texts. I assumed that was the end of it. But Emily came to me. She stood at my door one late afternoon, holding my letter in one hand, her eyes misty. You didn't have to do this, she said quietly. Yes, I did. She stepped inside, sat at the kitchen table, and held the letter like it was fragile. "I don't know how to forgive you," she said. "I'm not asking you to. I'm just trying to stop failing." She exhaled. Then, surprising us both, she laughed. A small, exhausted thing. "Do you remember that Christmas, when I was 7? You tried to build me a dollhouse and gave up halfway through?" "I remember," I said, smiling faintly. "You ended up using the box it came in." She nodded. "You left the tools on the floor. I cut my hand." "I know." "You didn't even have bandages." "I wasn't ready to be a father." "You still aren't," she said gently, "but you're trying." Later that night, she called Tommy. I don't know what she said. I only know she asked him to meet her at a park, neutral ground. He came. They sat on a bench under a cluster of old elms, their leaves starting to turn gold in the late summer sun. Emily held the photo from my letter. She showed it to him. "That's our mother," she said, "smiling because you were alive." Tommy didn't speak for a while. His hands clenched on his knees, then relaxed. "She chose to keep me," he finally said. "Yes." "She lied to your father." "Yes." "But she loved me. Deeply." He stared at the photo, eyes glassy. "He thinks that makes it better?" "No," Emily said. "He doesn't think anything makes it better. That's why he sent it." They sat in silence again. Emily cleared her throat. "You know, I used to dream I had a twin. I always thought it was just fantasy. Something my brain made up because I felt unwhole." Tommy smiled sadly. "I used to dream I was being looked for, like someone was searching for me in the dark." "You were." She reached into her purse and pulled out an old camp photo. 2 6-year-olds smiling at the camera, arms slung around each other. "We were there together," she whispered, "and we had no idea." Tommy looked at it. "I used to think you were the only person who ever really saw me. I still do." He swallowed. His voice was barely a breath. "I didn't know how to be angry at you. I didn't even know why I was angry." "I know. And when I found out—" He trailed off. Emily's hand found his. She gripped it tightly. "We can't rewrite it," she said, "but we don't have to live inside it either." He looked at her, his sister, and for the first time said the word neither of them had dared speak. "Sis." She smiled. "Yeah, brother." They stayed like that, hand in hand, grieving what they lost, but beginning to reclaim what remained. Back at home, I stared out the window. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't expect inclusion. But somewhere, in some park I couldn't see, my children had finally met, not as strangers, not as lovers tangled in fate, but as siblings. Blood of the same blood, fractured by silence, reunited by truth. And that was enough. The invitation came in the mail, wrapped in ivory paper and gold trim. It wasn't ostentatious, just elegant, understated. Emily had always had taste. Her name, and that of someone I'd never heard before, were written in soft script. Not Tommy, of course. Someone new. Someone safe. There was a small note tucked inside the envelope. "We're keeping it small, but there will be a chair for you if you want it. No pressure." I sat with it for hours. I imagined her in white again, this time with a different man, a different promise. I imagined the music, the flowers, the guests. I imagined the moment where a father might give his daughter away, but I didn't go. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't shame. It was space. The kind she deserved to claim as her own. I didn't want to be the story anymore. On the day of the ceremony, I took a walk through a small park in our old neighborhood. The air was crisp. the leaves just starting to burn orange. I sat on a bench by the fountain, closed my eyes, and whispered a blessing. I hoped she felt it. Weeks later, a photo arrived. Emily stood beneath a canopy of autumn branches, smiling wide, tears in her eyes. The man beside her held her hand like he'd been doing it forever. They looked peaceful, whole, but it wasn't the photo that undid me. It was the shot of the ceremony itself. Rows of white chairs, and in the front row, one seat left, deliberately empty. On it sat a small wooden sign. For the man who taught me love through silence. I wept for an hour. I didn't expect to hear from Tommy again. But 2 months after the wedding, he called. "Hey," he said, voice uncertain. "You have a minute?" "Always." "I'm in town. Thought maybe I could buy you a coffee." When he arrived, he looked older than I remembered, like time had rushed to meet him. But his eyes held something new, a gentleness. We didn't talk much at first, just sipped coffee, commented on the weather. Then out of nowhere he said, "Do you remember what Mom looked like when she smiled?" I blinked, like the world had just given her a secret. He nodded slowly. Emily showed me the photo, the ultrasound one. We sat in silence again, a comfortable one this time. "You know," he said, "I always wondered what it would be like, meeting you." "And?" I asked. "It's complicated." "I know." He looked at me, really looked. But I've spent my whole life chasing answers. Turns out, I didn't need all of them. I just needed to know someone cared enough to be sorry. I didn't speak. I couldn't. He reached across the table and put his hand on mine. "Thanks for the letter, Dad." It was the first time he'd called me that. I nodded, barely able to breathe. Time passed. I moved into a small room at a quiet assisted living home just outside Concord. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to be near people who wouldn't let me disappear. Every Tuesday night, I'd sit with a circle of other men, fathers, grandfathers, some broken, some healing, and we'd talk. Most weeks, I told stories about Barbara, sometimes about Emily, rarely about Tommy. That part was still too tender. But one day, an older man asked if I regretted anything. "Of course," I said, "but regret doesn't keep you warm. Connection does." He nodded like he understood. The nurses liked me, said I told good stories, said I made people feel less alone. One night, I stayed late after group. The room was quiet. I sat with my journal, wrote the final page of a story I'd been telling for years. "I once had 2 children," I wrote, "and I lost them both. But it wasn't until I realized I'd lost them that I began to find them again." I closed the book, placed it on the shelf beside a photo of Emily and Tommy, taken just last month, arms around each other, matching grins, siblings finally united by more than circumstance. That night, as I turned off the light, I didn't feel lonely. I felt something else. Maybe peace, maybe hope. Maybe the truth that some endings don't come with doors closing, but with hearts opening. And that was enough.